Hello, I will do this video in fuller detail later. It's about the Cornucopia, but it's nearly midnight and half a bottle of scotch, so I'm just in one of those moods. And so I'll just do a prelim, might delete this video later. I will do a fuller version, but in regards to the Cornucopia and the Horn of Plenty. So again, probably could trace it back earlier, but we have some solid links here, and so we'll begin with the Greek era. I don't believe it was invented. I believe that there are earlier connections, but we have, for instance, this Greek coin with the Cornucopia and some pottery here. So we have Hades with Demeter or Ceres. That's where we get the word Ceres from. So Hades or Pluto, the god of the underworld, and Ceres or Demeter, the god of agriculture, wheat, and grain, if you want to think of it that way. But he's holding the Cornucopia, the Horn of Plenty. The thing with the Horn of Plenty is it's basically associated with all of the major gods and goddesses. So, for instance, Athena. This is I don't believe this is an ancient statue, but there are more than a few sources that will connect the Horn of Plenty. There we see with Athena, the goddess of wisdom and defensive military arts. Ptolemy II, so Ptolemaic Egypt. So when people talk about Egypt, they just sort of lump it all together, but we're really, for instance, Cleopatra was the last Ptolemaic pharaoh of Egypt. The Ptolemaic period of Egypt was Greek and basically covered from roughly 500 BC up to the time of Caesar, so roughly 1 AD. And so much of what we call Egypt, so there's a 2,500 year period officially, at least according to the establishment, which is the Egyptian period. It's really a mess because the Ptolemaic period and then for instance, the middle period of Egypt, and then we go back to the Old Kingdom. For instance, the pyramids is Old Kingdom, as they say, 2,500 BC roughly. And at the infancy of their civilization, they created pyramids which were unrivaled in height at least, until the great cathedrals or the skyscrapers as well. But yeah, so what's just generally referred to as Egypt is really several separate, clearly separate periods by their engineering skill and their symbology. But Ptolemy, 200 BC, again, Cornucopia. For instance, Cleopatra, I think about 30 BC she died, and like Cleopatra is thought of as classical Egyptian. No, she's really Greek, if you want to say. She's Ptolemaic. She's not so far separated from the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids that it's closer to us than anyway. But now Bactria, or as we call it now, Afghanistan, the Greco-Buddhist, anyway, but Bactria, here we see Heracles. This is a square coin from Bactria. Heracles, or Hercules, is what's most commonly called in the Cornucopia, the Horn of Plenty. Now this is just one of the versions of how the Cornucopia was invented, and in the next videos I'll go into more detail. I'll talk about Zeus and Amalthea and others. But one of the origins of a cornucopia is that Heracles or Hercules wrestled with the river god and broke off his horn, and there we get the Horn of Plenty. The Roman river god, the river Tiber or Tibernus, the Roman river god, well, he's holding the cornucopia, the Horn of Plenty. Fortuna, the Wheel of Fortune. Fortuna often carries a wheel. This time she's carrying a rudder. Most imagery you'll see her carrying, or she's holding Fortuna's wheel. But again, the Cornucopia, the Horn of Plenty. This is a goat's horn in its original form, or at least Zeus form, anyway. Again, so Fortuna. So in this particular one, we see this as a sandstone Roman relief. Fortuna's wheel. The Wheel of Fortune, usually hexagonal. There you can see the 6 wheels, but she's holding the Horn of Plenty. Now, it depends on what the Cornucopia is associated with many, many goddesses. It's unlike other emblems. It's not that clear. In this version, so previous one, horn of Fortuna, the Cornucopia, and she's holding the rudder. Here we see Fortuna, typically holds Fortuna's wheel. Did a video on that a while back as well. Here we see again Fortuna, horn of plenty, but she's holding the rudder. This is from a Roman vineyard and the boar's head. You'll see other, for instance, still at the Vatican. This symbol has persisted through time, which as we shall see. But a boar's head cornucopia are connected to a vineyard and Bacchus. Well, again, the cornucopia and Dionysus Bacchus as well. So, but that's for the future one. Ceres, Cereal, or Demeter, as she was called in the Greek. Ceres to the Romans, Demeter the Greek, the goddess of agriculture. Typically, agriculture as in like off the field. So what we also have is the Greek god Aristaeus was the god of cheese making and honey, and if you would call it processed foods. I wouldn't use that term strictly, but Ceres is more to do with the from the field, fresh foods, let's say. Byzantine. Now, the Roman, as many history books will say, that the Roman Empire collapsed around about the 5th century BC with Germany. No, absolutely not. The Byzantine Empire. So what happened was the Roman Empire split into 3 groups. We had the it was actually 3 groups, and so what we include France and Holland was so we had 3 emperors. But now let's just simplify that. We had Rome and we had Constantinople, the East and the Western Empire. Rome, the Western Empire collapsed, but Constantinople was the Eastern Empire. It did not collapse. It became known as the Byzantine Empire. So the Byzantines went through for much longer than after the official collapse of Rome. So the Byzantine Constantinople is a continuation of the Roman Empire. It did not collapse with the fall of Rome. The Byzantines actually recaptured Rome later, but because the Byzantines were Romans in the empirical sense, as in the empire, and of course they carried through, even though they become, in inverted commas, Christianized, they carried through the old Roman symbolism. So we see the cornucopia throughout the Byzantine period. Byzantine floor mosaic, again we see there the cornucopia. And the spirit of Constantinople, Istanbul. Okay, so it was called as in Constantine, the Roman emperor who Christianized the empire. This is the spirit of Constantinople. Now, if you look up Tyche, Tiki, the Greek goddess, many connections there, but she's holding, of course, the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. Now, these are Fortuna. Now, the Greeks called her Tiki again, but the cornucopia once more. Here in Sydney, cheers to Jeff and Don. We visited this the other day, the Cornucopia Cafe. Now, this particular symbol has carried through and still is with us today. In the fuller episodes, I'll go into this, but for instance, like advertisement for, to get people over to California, the Cornucopia of the world, the horn of plenty. The horn is overflowing with fruit, especially. It's like a symbol of fertility, of plenty and of nourishment and everything that goes with that. I did a video a while back in the older days, I mean pre-World War II, people were much more in tune with not only biblical symbolism, but classical symbolism as well. So this is from cigar box. So I did a video on cigar box art. And what do we have? We have the cornucopia. This is essentially the caduceus. So if you look at the earlier versions of the caduceus, the measuring rod of Hermes, this is more in tune with the older versions of it. Now it's more those 2 snakes wrapping around. But that's even if you look at the Greek pottery, pre-Roman Greek pottery, this is the caduceus. This is the early Hermes. So what we have is Hermes, but also we have the cornucopia overflowing with fruit and grain and oil and wine. Another example of cigar box art, and what do we have again? The cornucopia there. It is embedded in our collective subconscious. So before World War II, classical imagery and stories such as Greco-Roman and biblical stories, we were much more in tune with these, or the trident as well, which is an important reference, but we'll get to that in the next episodes. We were much more in tune and understood these Jungian archetypes. And what's happened is that they've been transferred through Hollywood into more modern, let's say. However, these, for instance, as I'll go into the future, for instance, the Hunger Games or the Matrix, overloaded with ancient symbolism. It appears we've moved away, but the further, the further we move away, the closer we actually get back to the original. It's just transferred into a different form. But again, cigar box art, the cornucopia, the olives as well, and the trident. Like this is a tracing board right here. Okay, so now earlier episode I talked about the Phrygian cap. So this is the coat of arms of Colombia, and what do we have? The cornucopia of wealth and nourishment and fertility. So we see there the wealth coming from the cornucopia. Also we see the fruits and the grains and so forth there. That's the Colombian coat of arms. In Honduras, what do we have? Well, what do we have here? The cornucopia once more. Now we go into those symbols and even this pyramid and checkerboard type thing, but we'll leave that for the moment. Venezuela, cornucopia. And also this sheaf of wheat. This is an important symbol, and we'll come back to that as well. Universal, well, even these two branches here. Now, Kharkiv in Ukraine, Ukrainian Orthodox use the caduceus in the bishops, for instance. The rod that they carry has the caduceus on there, these two entwined snakes, which is a hermetic symbol. This is a measuring rod of a wand, which is made of an olive branch, again from this older legends, but, well, the cornucopia once more. Apopka in Florida, what do they have? The cornucopia, and if you're in any doubt, well, what do we have there? Now, North Carolina, Phrygian cap, cornucopia. Now, that's by no means the only one, because the Great Seal of the state of New Jersey, Phrygian cap on the measuring rod, the wand, or the staff, as in the staff which Moses carried, or the hermetic aspects of it as well. Well, again, cornucopia, and the Great Seal of Idaho, Phrygian cap on the rod, measure, measure, the truth shall set you free, and the cornucopia. Again, well, the sheaf of wheat once more. Again, another. It's just there. Now think. Well, okay, constellations. I'll get into that into the next episode. I just sort of want to do a quick one to get my thoughts around it. Because once I speak, it's one thing to think it and one thing to write it down. I don't like to work with a script. I like to anyway. Masonry. So the steward. Well, again. Grain, oil and wine, and, well, again, connected to the cornucopia there. What are we at? Nearly 14 minutes. The Hunger Games. So when the game started, they would have to run to the cornucopia. Again, they said it quite, that's where the supplies and the food and plenty was, a horn of plenty. And even the second round of the games, there was a redesign of the cornucopia there as well. Oddfellows and the cornucopia. Well, it's just, again, it's in there. There's the cornucopia. There we see another version of it. Oddfellows and their symbolism, cornucopia, including all the other ones as well. Let's not forget those. America, Thanksgiving, cornucopia. There we see First Lady Nixon and preparing for Thanksgiving with the cornucopia. There we see Warmonger Bush, well, the cornucopia there, a cartoon version of it. Cornucopia, horn of plenty as a centerpiece. Another example of a centerpiece. Cornucopia, maize, corn. Okay, cornucopia designs by Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart went to jail for lying to the FBI once. Oh, that's not Martha Stewart. she only lied once, not 39 times. That's the actual Martha Stewart Cornucopia.